It's not God's will that people experience shame, but there remains the influence of the devil, the influence of other people, and the predisposition of an individual that exist as sources of this problem. In other words, we've established through Scripture, God does not want Christians to feel shame. We're not supposed to have to deal with that. But you've got the devil, you've got society, you've got a person's own background that leaves them predisposed to dealing with it. There exists a perverted union between satanic forces, society, and spiritually abusive communities that wage war for the purpose of keeping believers in the bondage of shame. So this is a very complex situation, a very complex issue. Contrary to dogmatic convention, and contrary to what you may hear from a televangelist, yes.
What's dogmatic?
Dogmatic is dealing with I can't define a word using the same word, so dogmatic deals with what the popular religious culture says. It's a religious cultural idea is the best way that I can describe it. It's not necessarily, dogma is not the same as theology, because theology is a study of who God is and a study about God. But within a church or within a spiritual group, they may have certain things that they believe that are a part of their cultural heritage that, and sometimes there's absolutely nothing wrong with it, but it may not be part of a theological system, or it may not be a part of that study of who God is. For example, with this, there's a tendency to blame everything on the devil. That can be a cultural perspective of a specific church or of a specific group. Everything that happens is the devil's fault. So that's the first thing that people will say, is that the devil has been messing with me my whole life and that's why I feel shame. That's not exactly how this works.
Okay.
Instead, what has actually happened is the devil set up a system within society, and we're born into it, we experience it, and he can sit back in the background and manage things if you start to get it aligned. So the devil doesn't have to mess with you your whole life for you to have issues with shame. That can happen just from dealing with people. We're socialized to be susceptible to shame, independent of any exposure to spiritual communities, through a lifetime of performance-based and shame-based relationships. Talked about it last week, that a performance-based relationship is one where I'm accepted based on how I act, independent of who I am as an individual. I don't see people as having character. All I see is their actions. Shame-based relationships communicate the idea that you are worth less as a person on the basis of not being able to perform up to what I expect. The way that I show you love, the way that I show you acceptance, the way that I react towards you is informed simply on what you do and don't do, and whether or not it meets my performance standards and the way that I want you to act. So those are performance and shame-based relationships that we all deal with. You could never set foot in the church and know exactly what I'm talking about, because everybody deals with it. That's part of the culture of this country and the way we interact with people. Spiritual communities tend to propagate the dynamics of performance-based and shame-based relationships through through their theological misinterpretations. And spiritually abusive communities use these dynamics to force confirmation and assimilation of their people. This creates a situation where a believer's freedom from shame is entirely dependent upon the affirmation of their community and their performance as a Christian. Should this Christian begin to stumble into the truth of liberty through grace, the devil will be there to smack a person back into the system where the truth of God's covenant will be undermined. So you get a person who is born, they go out through society, they experience performance-based relationships, they experience shame-based relationships. They get into a spiritual community. The message of performance-based and shame-based relationships as it relates to God ends up being projected onto God. I think we said last week is that if the only way I know how to relate to people is based on how they perform, and then I start reading the Bible, I'm automatically going to start understanding God through the perspective of the relationships I've had already. It means that I start interpreting the Bible and through the lenses of performance-based relationships. And then in spiritually abusive communities, they exploit this to be so that way your feelings of freedom and your experience of freedom is based on their approval, and they can use that shame in order to, the threat of taking away their approval and making you feel less as an individual, as a means of getting you to conform to their expectations, their standards.